I'd like to talk a little bit about what I like to call time distortion, which basically means that for most people, being the year 2018 right now, most people probably think back maybe to the 1960s, 1950s, and they go, wow, things were really different back then. It was just a whole different life, whole different viewpoint and interpretation of life and behavior and fashion and such. Most people don't take into account that in the relativity of the age and the duration of human beings on this earth, we might be talking the history of man in whatever stage of his evolution. Probably, conservatively, maybe 5-6 million years. So to take 50 or 60 years going backwards, it's really a blink of an eye, really. And the way that reality works really is in relation, my theory is that the last real cycle of human civilization hasn't been 50 years ago or 100 years ago or 1,000 years ago. I think it goes back to approximately maybe around 6,000 to 8,000 BC. Now, that's when I think the last cycle of real change, the last real reformation or revolution of life changed. Because I like to regard this period as a very special moment, and that is the transition from most hunting societies started to use agriculture technology to not only as a means for survival, but as a new approach in dealing with reality and life. It was the new age of the property owner, of the king, and of the transition into patriarchal society from what used to be called a society of matriarchs. The society of matriarchs was mainly the foundation of the hunting society, of the wandering society, of a society that was orgiastic, which means many times an individual never knew who their father was. But having a father wasn't as important in the hunting society. Why wasn't it important? Because you had hundreds of uncles. And in a way, each uncle provided a different color of the spectrum, which at the end of the day became something very useful for the individual, rather than just having one source pounded into you without any counter to that viewpoint. So the interpretation of life in a hunting society, in a matriarchal society, was just very different and very hard to conceive from, especially from the point of view of a mind derived from Judeo-Christian, Islamist kind of rooting. Our minds are programmed in such a way that we can only look back on such times and see it as something, it's just totally against human nature. We are right. You know, our principles. The principles that we have right now are the correct ones, and back then we were just like primitive. And that's because we are very limited in the way that we think. We just don't realize that we do have our limitations. Because it is a great conceit to us to think that we've evolutionized into something grand and epic, and we have really made our time on this earth work for us, that we've advanced and we put in the effort, when in reality we are on a path of destruction. So even though we still do have that vanity that we have contributed something, that our present path has brought us something. That's why the only true reformation or revolution has been the revolution from the matriarchal society to the patriarchal society. Anything after the age of kings and the age of property and the age of the technology of notation and records and history, this has really been a very recent age. And I'm talking about biblical times, supposedly, where our major myths have come from. Egyptian times. Those all fall in within this patriarchal machine. The Renaissance, medieval times, it's just a variation on the same thing, really. It's a patriarchal system will run amok, pretty much. And the reason it's gone amok is because any kind of patriarchal system the difference between a patriarchal system and a matriarchal system is that the matriarchal system always gives consideration to the male side of things, because there is a very deep part of what is feminine or female that takes everything into consideration, including the male principle. No, the funny thing about the male way of looking at things is that it is given the option to take the female principle into consideration, but at the same time it can look at an alternate way of looking at things which doesn't take the feminine or female ways into consideration. And that's the age that we're living in today. We are living in a patriarchal society which sometimes does take women into consideration or female principles into consideration. But since it has the option not to do it, which, let me state, it's an aberrant option, because in terms of peace and harmony and connection and presence, the agriculture or industrial society has no clue that the hunting society were much more connected than we are. Now we can come back and say, oh no, but we have all this materialistic technology and we can do things a lot faster. And, well, you know, we can pull all kinds of capitalist rabbits out of the hat and to justify how great we are and how evolutionized we are. But in reality, the hunting society was much more connected to the earth and to reality than we are. So it's a funny thing about the Hindu calendar, because kind of it's a connection to what I've been saying about the incredible expansiveness of time, and how time is divided or how it's perceived. The Hindu calendar, you know, goes back millions of years and has each stage, you know, there have been many cycles in human civilization. The only thing is that man is very prejudiced to think that just because the writing technology didn't exist, it means that man was ignorant or somewhat less than what he is today. The only thing that divides us is that we can express thoughts through language and writing implements. When in reality, if you do think it through, that's just a very simple supposition and might be an outright fallacy. But it is all about programming, and we are programmed in a certain way by culture and society, even by family, and all these sources are totally well-intentioned. The problem is, you know, erroneous deviations can cause great chaos and havoc. So I believe it's important to take time into consideration, or try to perceive reality in more grander terms than you know, what happened 10-15 years ago, and how great those times were 10-15 years ago, and now things are horrible. Now we are taking very, very, very little slight slivers. The truth is, there's no one that's necessarily happier today than they were 50 years ago. All these are just kind of like factoids thrown out that become realities. People were much more brutal and much more cruel in a lot of different ways. Yes, outwardly, the cleavers didn't look like they had their shit together. But there's a more insidious thing going on below the surface. And basically, it's the same patriarchal society that we're still under. As a matter of fact, from my point of view, it seems to be getting stronger. We're going back more into tyrannical ideas, more and male-based ideas, more women willing to become submissive to these patriarchal ideals, mainly supported by Christian values, submit to your man. So in a lot of ways, I think we're going more into, we still haven't hit the apex of the patriarchal system. Unfortunately, this is a very contradictory statement that I'm going to make, but I think eventually it might take the total destruction of human civilization for a new way to come. And that's why the Hindus have declared this last period in human civilization the age of destruction. So everything that I'm stating, I'm trying to state in the very best positive sense. I don't state these things to be dark or doomsayer, but unless we move forward in life as human beings, we have to realize that there are some parts of reality that maybe we don't want to take into account because we want to exclude the sort of unpleasantries. It's like you don't want to imagine people going to the bathroom because it brings up them in a whole new light, but it's still a reality. And in something as important as life and reality and interpretation of life, I think it's important to take into account and that there is a possibility that, man really isn't ready to take a mantle of responsibility, because man is still just ruled by certain base instincts. And my thesis, my opinion regarding this is that, we are not mature because we need the female principle to take over, like we had in very, very, very ancient times when we were hunters. Women are the only ones that are going to take everything into consideration. Man, unfortunately, is incapable of doing this, as he has proven the last 8,000 to 10,000 years. Now, unless we are willing to learn from history, if we learn from history, it's clear as day. How many millions and maybe billions of lives have been murdered or genocide? For what? For nothing. Most boundaries have remained pretty stable in this period of time, so-called boundaries. Maybe a few deviations. But is it anything that calls for the extermination of millions and millions and millions of souls? Most of them innocent? Well, this is the product of the patriarchal society. So if we are going to divide life up and say that, the 19th century was better than the 20th century. No, it's the same shit. The only thing is that there's more people on the earth, so everything has to be configured a little bit differently. But people are still going through the same sufferings. I think in a more chaotic level presently, because at least before the 20th century, most people were God-fearing, so that impeded them from certain aberrant life choices. But now, in the age of God is dead, everything is an option. It's like, in a way, it's like when a parent leaves a room, the kids run amok. The kids can do anything they want. And, when kids are kids and they're not men or women or adults, it can lead to rampant chaos that runs through every child in that room. Kind of like a Lord of the Flies thing.